To start, you have to open your Unity version and you have to make a new project by clicking either here or here. Okay, and once you're taken to the next screen, we just have to set the project name and where it's going to be stored. So I'm simply going to name this basketball, and the location is going to be a projects folder that I just created under my home folder. Let's make sure 3D is enabled here to make sure everything is going to work, and also we're going to click on create project. So let's just wait a few seconds for it to be ready. Okay, and after the code is ready, after the necessary setup is ready, here we are in the Unity editor. And for this game, let's make sure that if you go to the game window, you're going to select the resolution to be free aspect, just for now. Okay, so with this project open, we have to decide a few things. When you make a basketball game, there are several different ways you can make it. It could be a two-dimensional game. It could be made of 3D assets, but in a 2D perspective, for example. It could have a retro look. But for this project, to keep things simple, we're going to make it three-dimensional. We're going to use basic 3D primitives that are already built in Unity. And we're also going to execute this from a first-person perspective. Okay, it's like you're playing a shooter game, for example, but instead of shooting bullets, you're simply going to throw the basketball towards a certain direction and try to score a point by making the ball go through the hoop. So, how do you activate the first-person shooter mode? Some of you, if you are working on your first projects, you might think, okay, there is going to be some 3D knowledge here that is going to be necessary. It's going to take some time to learn. I need to learn a lot of mathematical concepts. That would be true several years back, but since we are working with Unity, you can use packages that already have that implemented for you. So there is no need to reinvent the wheel if you already have the entire logic ready for you. So, if you go to the Assets menu here at the top, you have an option that says Import Package. And once you enter there, you're going to see Custom Package. This is if you downloaded something from the internet, and then you would browse for the package file and then import everything into Unity. But in this case, we want to see the things built in with the Unity editor, okay? So you have a few options here: 2D, cameras, characters, cross-platform input. There are lots of things here, but we want to use characters. Once you click there, you're going to see a new menu opening here that says Import Unity Package. It's like you're extracting a zip file, for example, a compressed file. There are going to be several other things inside. You're going to see folders, you're going to see scripts, images, materials, animations. There's tons of content here. You don't have to mark or unmark anything. You just have to press Import, wait just a little bit, and all the assets are going to be in your project. So once this is done importing, you can go to the project window here, make sure the assets folder is selected, and you're going to see a new folder pop up here, okay, after the import process is done. So it's great that Unity has that way to use assets that were already implemented. You can just go to the asset store, you can find some free or some paid assets, import to your project, and focus on making the game instead of reinventing the wheel. Okay, so there we go. Here in the assets folder, we have another folder called standard assets. We're going to open that. Here there are other subfolders like cross-platform input, editor, utility, but we just need to go to characters. Here there are three folders. We're going to worry about the first one, which is the first-person character. And to integrate the first-person character in the game, it's very simple. You just go to the prefabs folder, you're going to get this FPS controller prefab, then drag and drop in the hierarchy. Okay, so this is everything that we need to activate the first person mode. So if you go to the scene here, you see that if you have the first person controller selected, it's going to be right here in the center of the world. If you press the play button now to test this, okay, it's basically to set the game to be active, then if you move your mouse around, you're going to be able to see the sky, okay, if you rotate your mouse a little bit, you're going to find the sun, so the entire logic for that is working. But here are a few comments. Notice that here in the bottom we have a message that says there are two audio listeners in the scene. Please ensure there's always exactly one listener. So if you open the console window here, or by going to Window and Console, you can see the entire message. The thing is, if you select the first-person controller and you look at this scene, you're going to see that there is a camera icon here. This exists because we're going to see things, we're going to see the entire world from the perspective of the first-person player that is here, from the character. However, if you look a little bit more, you see that there is another camera here. This came with the default project, so this is not going to be needed. You just select that main camera here in the hierarchy, right click and choose delete. So we're going to have only one element here. Okay, and another thing that you must have noticed, if you select the first person controller in the hierarchy and press play, take a look at the inspector. You're going to see that the position here on Y is always decreasing. So why this is happening? The way the coordinates work in Unity is you have three values for every visual element that is going to be here. You have a value for X, you have a value for Y, and a value for Z. Okay, and if you look at the scene window, you can see these arrows here if you have this moving tool selected. So the red arrow is for the X value, and this is the horizontal position of whatever you have selected. The blue one is the Z-axis, so that is for the depth. You can see the value changing here. And Y is for the vertical axis. So if Y is getting negative, it means that the player is falling. Okay, so physics is already working for this first-person controller. So we need to make a floor, so our player is not going to basically fall forever. So we come here to hierarchy. We're going to right-click, choose 3D object, and then cube. Once you do that, you're going to see a cube in this scene. To make things simple for us, we want to make sure that the position of this cube is going to be 0 on X. On Y, let's use -2. And Z is going to be 0, so it's going to be right below the player. Okay, you see the player is high enough so it's not touching this cube here. With the cube selected, we want to make it a bit larger than this. So we can change the scale on X to say 10, for example, and Z can be 20. Okay, and we should also get this cube and rename it to floor. And just by doing that, if you press the play button, you're going to see that the player falls and is here in the ground. Okay, you can walk around and you're not going to be falling forever. Okay, so once you have all of these things done, another thing that you might want to do is to give a color to this floor so it's going to be easier to see. So this is the first moment where we're going to create something that is related to this project. Everything we did so far was built in Unity. Okay, so we have an FPS controller, we made a cube and transformed it into a floor, we have a directional light. So here's a very important tip to you. Once you start working on things that are exclusive to your project, it is a very, very good practice to make a folder and organize your hierarchy there. So you go to the Assets folder, right click, create, and choose folder. And I'm going to name this project. Enter this folder. And to color this floor, we're going to make a material, which is basically responsible for showing colors and applying shading effects, things like that. Right-click, create folder, materials, and inside that folder, we're going to again right-click and choose create material. I'm going to name this floor. Okay. So you see, it looks like a sphere, like a circle, but this is basically a preview of how this is going to look like. So with the floor selected, go to the inspector and change its color by clicking on the white rectangle and choosing whatever color you want. I'm going to choose a little creamy color like this one here. Okay, just open that, click and drag around. Okay, and to apply this material here, you can just drag and drop to the floor. Okay, and it's going to look like this. And let me just mute here the game window, and this time if you press play you should be on that floor. Okay, so something very basic for us. Okay, this is just for you to get used to using the Unity editor. Okay, to learn how to make a floor, how to use materials, how to add a first-person controller into the game. And once you're done with this, we should save this scene, because everything we do is inside a scene. Right now it says untitled with an asterisk. It means that we changed something and we didn't save it. So now we're going to hit File, Save Scene, and we're going to name this game, okay, and hit save. So if you go to the assets folder, you're going to see that game is here. So let's improve this. We go to the project folder, we make a new folder called scenes, like this. And now in the assets folder, we grab the game and drop in the scenes folder. Okay, so everything is saved, we're not going to lose anything, and we can move on to the next lesson, where we're going to learn how to make the basketball hoop. Before making the basketball target, we should improve our hierarchy a little bit. If you look in the scene, you're going to see a list of elements, and all of these elements are game objects. Okay, these objects are the basic entity in Unity, the basic thing that you can add behaviors to. So to improve this a little bit, we're going to right click here, choose create empty, and we're going to rename this game object as game controller, and make sure that its position is 0, 0, 0. Okay, now we're going to get everyone and drag from here and drop inside the game controller. So it's going to be inside it in the hierarchy. Now we're going to make another empty game object, and we're going to name this as the scenario. Okay, could be other names. And right now we're just going to select the floor and drag it inside the scenario. So nothing visually here changed, but structurally this is much better for us to work with. Now we want to make the target. I'm going to right click, choose create empty, and rename this game object as target. Okay, and this might be a little abstract to understand now, but what we want to do is to get this target and move it here to this position. I'm going to get the values for you. So Z is going to be 80, actually 8, and Y is going to be -1. Okay, so actually it should be a little bit lower. I think it's -1.5. Yes, we're going to use -1.5. We do this because we want the target to be right above the floor. This is going to be kind of the origin of the basketball target. Okay, basically this is what we're going to do here. Just put the numbers here and it's going to be in this position. Now let's right click on target, choose 3D object and select cube. Okay, this is going to be the pole. So I'm going to select the cube here and rename it to pole. I'm going to change the scale on X to something smaller, so 0.2. Z is going to be 0.2 as well, and Y it's going to be 5. Okay, the vertical position for the pole is going to be 2.5, so it's going to be standing like this. Okay, this is basically the pole. Okay, so we're just organizing its position, so it's going to start where our target game object started, okay, which is in this position, right? So this is everything we need for the pole. Now we're going to make the board that is going to hold the hoop. So select the target, right click, 3D object, and then cube, like this. We're going to set its position on Y to be, let me check here, 5, so it's going to be at the top of the pole. The scale on X is going to be 2, Y is going to be 2 as well, and Z can be something like 0.3. Okay, so X should be larger a little bit. Let's use 3. Good. And now we have to make the hoop. So that is going to be where the player has to hit the ball. Okay, let me just rename the cube here to board. And now right click. And for this one, it's a bit more complex. We're going to need to make 3 elements. So I'm going to select create empty again, rename this to hoop, and its position is going to be 5 on Y. Okay, actually a little bit lower, so 4.25, for example. Okay, now in the hoop, right click, 3D object, cube, we have this one. Let's change its scale on X to be very small, 0.2. Y is going to be 0.2 as well, and it's going to look like this. Okay, it's fine to be to have a little part coming out of the board. Okay, let's again right click on the hoop, 3D object, and cube. We're going to make something practically identical to that. So 0.2 on X, 0.2 on Y. And we're going to change the position of this to be around here. Okay, let's use -0.5, just a bit more, -0.8 on X. Z should be -1. And now we're going to make the opposite of this element. We're going to right click on it and choose duplicate. This is going to save us a lot of time because now that we have a duplicate for this element, you can change its horizontal position to be the opposite of whatever we have here. So if you have minus 0.8, we remove the minus sign and it's going to be here. Okay? And now to complete this, we're going to duplicate this cube once again, but this time we're going to change its x position to be 0. We are going to rotate this, okay? So we go to the rotation on y and change it to 90. And now z, we need to move to something else. So let's try minus 1.5. Then the scale on x, actually I think it's on z, yes. We're going to use something like 1.8. So it's going to look like this, okay? And finally, we duplicate this cube once more and move its x position and its z position actually to be around here. Okay, so this is basically what you need to make the hoop. If it is too small, you can just select whatever element you want and fine change its position. So just select the cube here, for example, move it to the left. You see the value for the z position is going to change. It's going to be different, but that's fine. And then you can select both of these hoop parts. You can move them here. And to make them bigger, instead of using the moving tool, you can use the scaling tool. Okay. Then you just grab this blue cube and drag it around. Okay. So this is the look that this is going to have. Okay. And just so we don't make this completely white, let's just change the color for it. We're going to Materials folder, right click, Create in Material. I'm going to make a pole material. We're going to make a hoop material, and we're also going to make a board material. So we have these three new materials. As for the board, I'm going to choose a light red, like this one. The hoop is going to be completely black, so I'm going to choose this color. And the pole can be silver. I'm going to get this one. Now that we did this, we can just select the material, drop it here for the pole, this one for the board, and for the hoop, you would have to drag and drop into all of these elements. But here's a tip for you. If you select all of the cubes at the same time, so you can select the first one by clicking on it, holding Shift and selecting the last one, and here in the mesh render component, you can expand the materials, and then you get the hoop material, drag and drop here where it says element 0. Okay, so this is the basic design that we have for the hoop. Okay, however, if we press play right now, we just have the player standing here. We have the basketball target. We don't have the ball yet. We don't have the basketball to actually perform the throwing. So we're going to make a very basic basketball. Here in this scenario, we're going to right click, choose create empty, and actually not create empty. Let's do this in a quicker way. Right click, 3D object, and we choose sphere. Okay, this is going to make a sphere as the name says. Okay, so let's rename the sphere to ball. All right, and let's make a color for it. In the materials folder, right click, create material, ball. Then we go to the color picker here, and we're going to choose an orange color. Okay, a bit more reddish, like this. So we drag it and drop here. Alright, however, if you press the play button, the basketball is going to be hovering around. Okay, it's not falling. No physics are being applied into this basketball. To do this, it's actually pretty simple. We need to do something extra because even though there are physics in the first-person shooter controller, well, it is already implemented. We don't know how to activate that. But it is actually pretty simple. You just select the ball, click on Add Component in the inspector, and you're going to search for Rigid Body, and then you click it here. Just by doing that, if you press the play button, then the ball is going to fall to the ground. Okay, you can even walk on top of it, and it's going to be rolling in this scene that we built, and it's going to basically fall. Okay, and now that we have this, we should work on a logic for making the player to be holding the ball, so then later we can perform the throwing. Let's do this in the next lesson. In order for the player to hold the ball, we need to do something a little bit different here. So we need to write a script for our player, for our first-person shooter controller. So we can write some logic here. In the beginning of the game, the player is going to be holding the basketball, and if you click, it's going to release and apply a certain force to throw the basketball. Okay, so first things first, we want to select the FPS controller. We go to the inspector and we rename it to player, just to make sure we understand that we are in fact dealing with a player. In the inspector, let's collapse a few of these components, a few of these behaviors here. And now we're going to the project folder. We're going to create a new folder and we're going to name this scripts. And inside scripts, we're going to choose create C# script. So we're going to write code for this player. Here in scripts, I'm simply going to name this player. Okay. Once you hit enter, you're going to see this little spinning wheel here, just to say that your code is being processed. It happens every time you change or you create any line of code. And after this is done, you can just double click the player to open MonoDevelop, which already comes with Unity, and it's a great coding tool. Okay, so just wait a little bit, it's going to be ready soon. And after this is loaded, we're going to be able to see what code Unity already left for us. Okay, and once you make this script, we also need to make sure that this is going to be executed by the player. So we need to add this script as a component for the player. Okay, there we go. So before we write anything here, let's make what I just did. We're going to select the player in the hierarchy, go to the scripts folder, drag the player script that we just made and drop in the player, just like that. And if you look at the inspector, the player script that you just made is right here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to open MonoDevelop and see a few things. Okay, the script is not empty. We already have some things for us. So let's take a very quick view here. These three lines are basically the using command. Okay, it's to include namespaces. It's to include kind of a package of things that were already implemented in Unity. So we can use collections, we can use the Unity engine elements, for example. It's just to enable the usage of a few things. And here is the actual definition of the player behavior. Okay, we have two methods, start and update. And methods are going to be a collection of instructions that are going to make something happen. Okay, start happens when our player is ready to be used, and update happens all the time. Okay, it's very useful for checking some things. But we want this player to be able to know what and where is the basketball. Okay, so to do this, we're going to make a variable here. We're going to type public game object ball, like this. So we're making a variable called ball. Its type is game object. Remember what I told you before, it's the basic element in Unity. And it's going to be public, so it can be accessed in the Unity editor. Okay, so let's see one thing at a time. We're going to save this script by going to File and hitting Save. If you go to Unity, you're going to see that the code is going to be processed one more time. And if you look at the player script, a new field appeared here. Okay, so we have ball, and it's set to none because it doesn't know what is the ball. So to make the assignment here, we're going to select the ball in the hierarchy, drag and drop it here. Okay, so you see that the icon changed, there's a new text here. It means that this variable in the player's code is now referencing this ball here. Okay, so that's everything we needed to know to reference the ball. Okay, and now the behavior that we want to do is if the player looks to whatever they want to look, the ball is going to follow. We want to give the feeling to the player that they are actually holding the ball. Okay, so how are we going to do this? We need to add a new reference here. And what we need to do is we need to reference this first person character. And why is that? As the player is rotating around by moving the mouse, this camera here is going to be have a different rotation. So we need to have a reference for the player's camera. So I'm going to come here in the player and I'm going to type public game object player camera. Okay, let's save this, go to Unity, wait for the code to be processed, and after that we're going to grab this first person character object from here and drop it here. Okay, it's the one that is holding the player camera. Okay, now that this is done, what we want to do in the beginning is to disable the rigid body from the ball. You might think that's odd because we just added a rigid body to it. The thing is, if we try to move the ball and with the technique that we're going to use, physics are still going to be applied, so some strange bugs might happen. If you're not used to Unity, you might not understand what's going on. So a trick is we can just disable the rigid body and then look around, and if we click to shoot, then we enable the rigid body again. But how do we do this? We can just go to the player script in the start method and type get component, and between the lesser than and greater than signs, between these two characters, we're going to type rigid body because we're accessing the rigid body class. We're going to open and close parentheses and then type dot enabled. Actually, in this case, we're going to disable just the gravity. So we're going to type dot use gravity equals to false. Okay, so the ball is not going to fall, but we still have the rigid body. That's perfectly fine for us. This happens in the start method. Okay, so right now let's see how this is going to look like. If we save and go to Unity and press the play button to test it out, we're going to see that the ball is going to be floating around. Okay, actually not yet. And yes, the rigid body is not being disabled because we're trying to change the rigid body of the player. Remember, here we are in the player script. So when we type get component rigid body, we are trying to get the rigid body from the player. But we want to do this with the ball. So here we're going to start by typing ball dot get component rigid body use gravity is going to be false. Okay, let's try that one more time. We save, go to Unity, and then we're going to press the play button. And if you look at the basketball, it's going to be hovering around. Okay, even though you can hit it and make it move, that's going to be just fine for now. Okay, and now when the player is going to look around, we want the ball to be right in front of the player. So to do this, we need to go to the update method, and we're going to change the ball's position directly. How do we do this? Here we're going to type ball.transform.position equals to, and then we have to set the position of the ball. We're going to do this in a different way. We're going to make the ball to be right where the player camera is, and then add a little offset. What we do is, independently of where the player is looking to, we're going to make the ball to be a certain distance away from where we are looking. So to do this, there are two things we need to do in the update method. We type ball.transfer.position and then equals to. The first thing, player camera dot transform dot position. Okay, this is going to make the ball to be right where the player camera is. And now to make it further away from the camera, we type the plus sign and then player camera dot transform dot forward. So there are two interesting things we have to talk about here. These two elements, position and forward, they're both vector 3. They're a collection of three elements, x, y, and z. Horizontal position, vertical position, and depth position. However, position here is referencing to a point in the world, but forward is referencing a direction, okay? So this doesn't have anything related to position. It's not the absolute position in the world. It's relative. It's like an arrow that is going to point somewhere. And we have forward, but we also have up, down, left, right. In all of these vectors, they have a magnitude of 1. That means that these arrows, the size, the length of these arrows is 1. So if you want to make the basketball to be further away from the player, you can just get this forward and multiply by any number you want. If you put 2, it's going to be 2 units away from the player in the forward vector. You can use 3, you can use 5, you can use a half, for example. But we're going to use 2 here, okay? We're going to save and see how this is going to look like. Let's go to Unity, wait for the code to be ready. Let's also save the scene from time to time, just to make sure we don't lose anything. And we're going to press play. Now, notice that wherever I look, the ball is basically following our player, okay, our stance. So this is how it's looking like. If you don't think this is a good distance, well, you could stop the scene, go to Unity, change that again, and that might take some time. So what you could do to speed that process up is to just go here where we define the ball and the player camera, and we can type public float ball distance, and I'm going to set it as 2f by default. Okay, so we made a variable called ball distance. It's a floating point number, so it can have a decimal part, and we set it as 2f. That's basically 2. So if we save that, we also have to go to the update method and change this 2 here to ball distance. Okay, let's save this, go to Unity, wait for the code to be ready, and now if we press the play button, okay, you see that the ball is in this position here, but if I come to the player script, I can change that distance to anything I want. Okay, we can basically test things, try to find a good value, and then after we agree that we have a good value, like 2.25, for example, we can just write that number down, stop the scene, come here and rewrite it by typing 2.25. Okay, so this is the value that we are going to use. Now we have a player that holds a basketball, but we still aren't able to throw it. Let's learn how to do this in the next lesson. Now that we have structured the way we have the player, we have the ball, a certain distance here, we can easily throw the ball into a certain direction, the direction we are looking at. So what we need to do is, we go to the player script, we have ball distance, we're going to type public float ball throwing force. And let's set this as 5F for now. Okay, so the question is, we need to do a few things. We need to be able to tell when the player clicks the mouse, and when this happens, we need to apply a certain force to the ball. So it's going to be thrown into any direction we want. Okay, so how do we do this? We need to add a few things to help us by doing this. First of all, we're going to type here private bool and then holding ball. We're going to type the equal sign and say this is true. So this is a variable that won't be exposed to the Unity editor or other classes. That's why it's private. It's a Boolean value, so it's either true or false. Its name is holding ball, and we start by saying that it is true. Okay, because we start by holding the basketball. And here in the update method, we have the logic for holding the ball. But this should only happen if holding the ball is true. So we need to make that verification. So here in the update method, we type if holding ball, like this, we open curly braces and we close them. Okay, so it's going to look like this. The ball only is going to have its position updated like this if this is true. Okay. And now we have to check here inside this if block if we have clicked the mouse. And how do we check that? It's pretty simple in Unity. You can just type input.get mouse button down. And between parentheses to pass an argument to this method, you just type 0. That's the left mouse button. You can use 1 or 2 if you want, depending on how you prefer this to work. But I'm going to use 0 to keep things very simple here, very straight ahead. Okay? And if this happens, then we need to do a few things. If we click the mouse, then holding ball is going to be false because we're going to release it. Also, the gravity needs to be reapplied to the ball. So I'm going to type ball.getComponent of type rigid body, then dot use gravity equals to true. Okay, so gravity is going to be reapplied. So let's try that. Okay, I'm going to save this. I'm going to go to Unity, wait for the code to be processed, and we're going to press the play button. Okay, so we are holding the ball, and if we click, the ball has its gravity restored, and it's going to fall here. Okay, but that's not very exciting. It just falls. It's not being thrown with the force that we determined, so this is something we have to adjust. To do this, we have to go here. We're going to access this rigid body again. So I'm going to type ball.getComponent of type rigid body. We open and close parentheses, we type another dot, and we're going to use add force. Okay, this is going to apply a certain force to the rigid body, so it's going to make the ball to be propelled into whatever direction we determine. And the direction is actually pretty simple because we have player camera dot transform dot forward. I'm going to come here and type player camera dot transform dot forward, and I'm going to multiply that by the throwing force, the ball throwing force. It's just like we did with the ball distance here. Okay, we have a vector that is going to reference a direction. We multiply it by anything we want, and it's going to be stronger. Okay, so we're going to save this. Let's go to Unity, wait for the code to be done, and after it is, we're going to press the play button, like this. I'm going to click, and the ball, it quickly fell. Okay, so the reason that happened is because the throwing force might be too small. So we can change that to 200 instead of 5. So let's press play. I'm going to click, and it was a bit better now. So if you want to have a stronger value, let's change that to 400 this time. We press the play button. Here we are holding the basketball. I'm going to throw it like this, and you see it was much stronger than before, but you have to tune that. It's a game design activity. You have to keep trying different values, pressing play, and finding what you want to achieve with this game. Okay, let's try one more time. I'm going to click, and it was a bit too strong now. It happens. Okay, let's just try again. So I'm here, let's try this angle, click, and the ball, and there we go. We have a score, okay? So that's perfect. It's exactly what we want to do. But notice that the ball isn't bouncing around. That's not very good, okay? It doesn't bounce, it doesn't stop. And this is very important for making this logic to work properly. So let's make this adjustment in the next video. To make the ball to bounce properly, we need to adjust its physical material. So if you select the ball in the scene and look at the collider, which is responsible for determining the area that collides with things, there is no material assigned here. It just says none. So we need to make a physic material. We're going to our project folder, and we're going to make a new folder here. So create, then folder, then physic materials. I'm going to open this folder, right click, create, and choose physic material. Okay, you choose that. We're going to rename this to ball, and we're going to select the ball and assign this material in this sphere collider. So let's grab it from here and drop it here. Okay, good. Now we can change a few things in this physical material, but basically we just want to change the bounciness of the ball. Right now it's set to 0, that's why it doesn't bounce around. So let's change this to 0.75. Okay, and just by doing that, if you press File, save the scene to make sure you don't lose anything, and press play, we can throw a ball here and it's going to bounce around, okay, until it stops bouncing and reach the floor. You can try other values here if you want, so you could make 0.85 for example. It might be too much. For example, if I do this throw, it might bounce back too strongly, that's why I used 75. But you can adjust all of these things by making physical materials to the board, to the hoop, to the pole if you want. So you can basically make new materials and tune them around. And depending on the version of Unity that you use, you can even select the colliders that you want to change with. And where it says material, you can just click on this circle and you're going to see a few default materials that come with Unity. Okay, it's like in a physic materials folder. You can just choose rubber, wood, metal, no friction at all, for example. You can do all of these things. You can just choose them here and use them. Okay, but we're going to use this very basic material that we made, so we have more freedom into selecting the bounciness that we want. Okay, and now that we have this ready, let's make sure we can restart the game once we throw the ball. Okay, we just wait a few seconds and restart the game so the player can try throwing again. In order to be able to restart the game, we want to do something very important here. We don't want the player to be able to restart the game. We want the game controller to be able to do that. Okay? Yes, the player could restart the game, but that's not a good practice. And even though we are making a small project, it is important to think right of hierarchy and implement things the right way. So let's do this very quickly. We go to the scripts folder, right click and create a new C# script, and this is going to be named game controller, the same name as the game object that we made in the beginning of this course. After it is done, we select the game controller and attach the script to it. Okay, you can drag and drop here or here in the inspector if you want, whatever is better for you. Now we select the game controller, and this game controller needs a reference to the player. So we can just type here public player with an uppercase P and player with a lowercase p. We do this because we want to know if the player is still holding the ball, because if it isn't, we're going to count down a few seconds and restart the scene. So for the player, we have this holding ball variable that is private right now. There are other ways to access this, but let's change this to public just to make sure this is going to be quick to use. Okay, and in the game controller, we want to check that variable here, that holding ball. We want to check if player.holdingBall equals, so two equal signs, to false. If this happens, it means we should count down and restart the scene. So for how long are we going to wait? I'm going to type here public float time to, or better than this, public float reset timer, and I'm going to set it as 5F. So there are going to be 5 seconds between the player throwing the ball and the scene restarting. Okay, and here in the update method we type reset timer minus equals time.delta time. I'm going to explain that soon enough. And if reset timer is less or equal than 0, then we're going to do something. So what's happening here? Time.delta time is going to return how many seconds have passed since the last frame. As the update method is it's executed on every frame of your game, then that means the reset timer is going to work as a countdown timer, because this minus equals means we're going to take from the reset timer how many seconds have passed since the last frame. So this is basically going to make this last for 5 seconds. And if the reset timer reaches 0, it means it's time to restart the scene and try throwing another ball. Okay? So to restart the scene, we need to use a new namespace. We need to include a new namespace here. So we type using Unity Engine.scene management, like this. And if reset timer is less or equal than 0, then we type scene manager.load scene. And between parentheses, we type the scene name, which is simply going to be game. If you gave another name to your scene, just use that name here, okay? But we are using it, it is called game right now, okay? So we're going to save this. Let's make sure that we are going to drag the player into the game controller field that says player, like this. And also, depending on the Unity version you're using, you might have a lighting issue once you restart the scene. Okay, it only happens in the editor, not in the final builds of the game. But to solve this, you can just go to Window, choose Lighting, unmark this auto checkbox, and press Build. You don't need to know the details of that right now. So basically, unmark that, press Build, and save the scene. Okay, now let's press the play button. We have the ball here. Let's try to make a score. And once I throw the ball, 5 seconds are going to pass. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. The scene restarts and you can throw a new ball. So the player can basically walk around, experiment a few things. We can even try to do something interesting here. I'm going to try to score it like this. Okay, and that was close. Okay, so we can try playing around with this scene. So to make this a bit more beautiful, we should add a few particle effects, okay, to make sure we're going to have some interesting feedback for the player. So let's work on this in the next video. Applying particle effects is a very simple and cheap way to make your game look beautiful. So what we can do here is, let's select our ball. So we go to the scenario game object, we choose the ball, and we want to add a particle effect to it. So I'm going to right click, choose, let me think here, particle system. Okay, and once you do that, if you look at the scene, if you move your camera around by right clicking here and using the WASD keys, you're going to see that we have some white particles just flying forward. That's not what we want to do right now, but if you look at the inspector, you're going to see that there are tons of settings here. So let's look at them one by one. We want to use the simplest shape for the particle system. Right now it's working like a cone, but we want to make it work like a sphere. So particles are going to go towards every angle you can imagine. So we go to the inspector in the particle system, we go to shape, and change it from cone to sphere. Okay, so it looks like this. It's going to go towards every direction. The particles are lasting for too long and they are too big right now. So we're going to change with the start speed and the start size. As for the speed, I'm going to use 1. So you see that they're already slower than before. And for the size, we can type 0.3. So they're going to look like this. Okay. The particles are also lasting for too long. Even if we have a slow speed, they travel too much. We can just change the start lifetime from 5 to something like 1, for example. So they just last for 1 second, or even shorter, even could be 0.3 or 0.5, for example. And then you might ask yourself, hey, now the particles, I don't see a lot of them. You can just go to the emission menu here and change the rate over time from 10 to 50, for example. So there are going to be lots of particles, and that is going to make things start looking interesting. Okay, and right now the particles are just plain white, but we can change that color. We could go to start color, but there's no need to change this one. We can just go and change it by setting color by speed or color over lifetime. Okay, we could use either both of them. The simplest one is color over lifetime. So we can just select it here. Okay, we're going to click on the circle for color over lifetime to activate it and choose this white rectangle here to select the color that we're going to use. Just click it, and here at this knob you can just double click on it to open the color picker and choose the first color that we want. So it's going to be red. That means when the particles start, they're going to be full red. Now we want another color. We can just click here on this region to add another tone. Now we double click and we can choose blue. Okay, so it's going to look like this. And finally, we can go to the last knob, which is this one. We can double click here and choose yellow. Okay, or we could choose green, for example. I think green is going to be better. So this is how it's going to look like. Okay, it's a bit trippy, it's a bit different, but it's going to be interesting. Okay, you can even adjust these knobs a little bit if you want to try different blends for the way the colors are appearing, but in general you can just use red, blue, and green, or green and blue. The order doesn't matter too much here. Okay, now we want to do a little test. Let's save the scene and press the play button. Notice that we are holding the ball, we can see the particle effects, but if you throw it, the particles are a bit weird, okay, because they are kind of attached to the ball. It's not working like a trail, it's not leaving a trail where it's going to. So to change this, we have to select the particle system, and let's go to simulation space. It says local, but we should click here and change that to world. If you look at the scene, apparently nothing changed. However, if you play the game now, and you're holding the ball here, if you walk, you notice that it's leaving a trail of particles, okay? I'm going to throw it so it's clearer to you. So look, it's now looking like a trail, okay? Particles are being left. And to achieve an even better effect than this, you could increase the lifetime of the particles to 1.5, for example, and change the speed to 0.3. Okay, so they're going to be very slow, but they're going to last longer, so it's going to have a beautiful effect. If you press play and you throw it, notice that they last longer and you can see that long trail left behind. Okay, and what we want to do is we just want this effect to appear if the player throws the ball. If we are holding it, we don't want it to appear at first. So to do this, we are going to need a reference to the particle system that we use. By the way, let's rename that to trail particle. Okay, so let's make a script for the ball. We're going to the scripts folder and then select create C# script and name this ball. Very simple. Then I'm going to choose the ball here and attach this ball script to it like this. Okay, now with the ball script here, I'm going to open it, and then I'm going to add a public game object. Then it's going to be trail. Let's name this trail object. Very simple. Okay, so now that we have this, we want to make a method. We want the trail object to start deactivated. So in the start method, I'm going to type trail object dot set active and pass false as a parameter. Okay, but if we want to activate it, We could simply access the trail object and then setting its activation, or we could declare our own method to do this. We can just come here and type public void activate trail, and between curly braces we type trail object dot set active, and we pass true as a parameter here. Okay, it could look something like this. And now in the player we're going to have a reference to the ball, but now we need to reference the ball script, because right now we just have the game object. So I'm going to type ball with an uppercase B and leave ball with a lowercase b here. And we go to the exact moment where the ball is thrown, and here we're going to type ball.activate trail. Okay, because now this is going to reference the ball script. Let's save this. Let's go to Unity and make the necessary assignments. We're going to select the ball and bring the trail particle to the trail object here. And in the player, we need to make sure the ball is assigned again because we changed its type. So I'm going to bring the ball and drop it here and save. Now, if we press play, we're holding the ball, no particle effects are appearing, but if we click to throw it, then the particles appear. So you throw the ball and it may go inside the hoop. Now, for a final effect to finish this little game, we want that if we hit the hoop, we want to have a huge firework of golden particle effects appearing. Let's work on this in the next video. For the final effect, we want to detect if the ball gets through this hoop, and if it does, we're going to show an exploding effect. So we're going to open our target game object. We're going to click here, then inside the hoop, we open again, and we're going to right click, choose create empty, and name this hoop, or better than this, we can name this score area. Okay, so right now it's a bit rough. There are no components in this game object as it's empty, but we're going to click on add component and change this and search for box collider and hit enter to add it here. Let's change the Z position to, let me see if -1 is good, and a little bit more, -1.2, yes, good, -1.2 for Z, and we're going to change the size on Y to be very small, 0.1. So if you don't pay enough attention here, you might want to just press play here and try to shoot the basketball through the hoop, but it's going to bounce back, okay, because we've basically added a block, we've added a barrier here, and we're not going to be able to score. Okay, this happens because there are two different ways to make collision work in Unity. You have trigger collisions and you have normal physical collisions. Trigger collisions, they basically verify for overlaps. If one object is taking an area, a space, a volume of another object. And this is exactly what we want. We want this to be a trigger collider. Okay, now this score area is also going to need its own script. So we're going to create a new C# script. I'm going to name this score area. Hit enter to save. Let's make sure this score area is going to have the script. So I'm going to drag it from here and drop here, making sure score area is selected in the inspector. We open the score area, and now is the question, how do we identify if we are colliding with the ball? We can just remove these methods here and type a new one, void on trigger enter. In between parentheses, we type collider, other collider. This name here is not a random name. This is used by Unity, on trigger enter. It is a void method. It has exactly this name, and it contains exactly this parameter. The name of this parameter can be different, could be anything else, could be C, for example, but I use other collider to make it clearer to work with. And to see if this is a ball, we just check if other collider dot get component of type ball is different than null. That means we have collided with a ball and not anything else. To test if this is working, we can print a message in the console. We can just type debug.log. In between parentheses, we can put the string score. Okay, let's try that out. We save that, go to Unity, just wait a little bit, and we press the play button. Let's try to get that right. So let me move back a little bit, throw the ball, and we have a score. Okay, so this is good. We managed to get a point. We managed to print the message. And now we should just worry about making the particle effect just like we did before. So in the score area, let's type here public game object effect object. Okay. We're going to re-add here the start method, so void start, open and close parentheses and curly braces. Here, effect object dot set active false. All right. So it starts as false, and when we collide with the ball, we type effect object dot set active true. Okay, so it's only going to be activated once the collision happens. Now we can move back to Unity and design the particle effect. So let's just come here in the score area. We right click, choose particle system like this, and by the way, let's select the score area and drag the particle system from here to here. Good. And now we can just change the design to whatever we want. We could still use the cone shape, but change its rotation. Okay, so let's select the rotation on X in the transform and change it to -90, like this. Once this is done, let's change a few values here. So the start speed, I'm going to use 5, I think that's good. Lifetime could be shorter, like 1 for example, and the size could be smaller as well. Let's use 0.3. Okay. Emission, I'm going to use lots of particles here, so let's type 70. We see lots and lots of them here. Okay. And as for the shape, we're still going to use the cone, but we want to change the radius that we have. This is the radius of the base. If you use a value close to 0, it's going to look like this. It's going to come from a very concentrated area. And if you use a large value, it's going to come from a wider area. So let's keep it on 0.4, like this. Okay, so let's change the color over lifetime. Okay, just like we did before. Let's mark this, choose this, and then change the first color to be yellow. Okay, I think that's good enough. Okay, you just add yellow as the first one and it becomes white at the end. Okay, it's like a shower effect. And the difference between this particle effect and the other one is, right now it's set to loop, but we can change that. We can remove this looping, okay, and change the duration to 1. So if you want to see the effect now, make sure you have it selected in the hierarchy, and here in the particle effect menu, you can just press simulate. So it's going to be executed for 1 second and it's going to stop. It's the exact effect that we want. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to save the scene, press the play button, and try that. Okay, so there we go. We started. Let's throw the basketball, and once we get that, we see that score effect. Okay, so you see very simple things that we did, very little changes, and we can see that very interesting and beautiful effect to work. Okay, that's something very basic. Notice that sometimes you might need to care about how the collision is working, because the ball might be high enough that if we basically walk with it like this, the effect is going to be triggered. So you might want to change a few things. For example, you might want to make the ball to be closer to the player, like 1.5 for example. Okay, if you look up, now this time it won't trigger the effect. And as a matter of fact, adjusting this is going to be a challenge that I'm going to give to you soon. Okay, important thing is we have two beautiful particle effects. We can throw the ball, we can score, and well, move on to try to hit a new target. Alright, so in this course we've learned how to do several interesting things. We can now make 3D objects, we can move them in space, we can use a first-person controller like this one, and we can throw balls. Okay, we can throw the basketball and try to score. That was a lucky shot, wow, that was good. And we also have some interesting particle effects to make the game to look beautiful. Okay, the ball is going to leave a trail. Our hoop is going to throw a nice golden effect, okay, if we manage to get a score, which is great. But there are a few things we have to change. For example, we should be able to tell the player that they can control the player by walking, okay? We're not just going to stand still like this and just move the mouse. So it would be interesting to add some instructions on screen to tell that you can use WASD or the arrow keys to move the player around, and that you have to click to perform a throw. Okay, another challenge, another thing that you have to do is sometimes we get some collisions that are wrong. For example, if I jump here with the ball, we're going to trigger the particle effect. Or if I throw it and it hits from the bottom of the hoop, it's not going to be correct. Okay, so you have to find a way, a solution to maybe surround this with invisible box colliders, and then the effect only happens if just the ball gets through the hoop, okay, and at the proper way. And another one that is going to be interesting is you could make this basketball target to change position every time you start a new scene. So there's going to be a new challenge. And maybe you might want to block the player from moving. So you don't move like you are in a shooter game. So you just look and then you click to throw the ball. Okay, so we have some interesting challenges for you to work with. And I'm sure this is going to be very interesting to evolve into a bigger project and maybe be a success in the app stores, right? So this is it. My name is Glauco Pires for Mammoth Interactive. Thank you very much for watching, and I see you next time.